Well, we're in class 3. This is the hump of 5 classes. Also, I've noticed there's last time I taught this class, we did 6 classes. And it feels like a much different range between 6 classes and 5 classes. There's like a defined center with this class, not like a no man's land. So, really excited for today's class. I think something's really going to gel. That's my hope. Before we get started, anyone have any questions or comments that have been lurking with them or tugging at them that they want to put out there for the good of the order? Oh, James.
Yeah, I did. So I've been going through Zen roots, and I keep sticking on the Kyogen Carlson's list of the 5 aggregates, which strike me as different from what's in the Great Compassionate, not Great, no. Is it Great Compassionate?
Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom.
Thank you, Heart of Great Perfect Wisdom. They seem to be 2 different lists after the 3rd one. At least it goes from. I don't have it.
Does anyone have it in front of them? I think Matt, you have the book in front of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, James, when I saw that list, that I had to do quite a bit of work, even as the person teaching this class, to be like, are they the same list? And getting to the answer that yes, they were the same list with different translations that send me in really different directions. But let's hear what they are in Kyogen Carlson's.
They're form, sensation, thought, activity, and consciousness.
Yeah, and Joichi, looks like you're on the next step. What do we have in the sutra book?
We have form, sensation, perception, formations, and consciousness.
And one more time, Matt?
Form and sensation, then thought and activity and consciousness.
So perceptions and formations, thought and activity.
I think the translation we have in our sutra is the more orthodox approach. And it kind of feels that way with formations, feels a little bit odd. Like, what does that really mean? Is there a place, is it feeling like, are you feeling blocked when reading Kyogen Carlson?
It's mostly that, I read his, and I guess either I've gotten so used to the other listing that it's jarring. Mm-hmm. They don't seem to line up. I can't see where one would think that they're an order list.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to mesh.
So maybe I'll say some things to get everyone on board. The 5 aggregates, if you're not reading Zen roots or aren't used to those terms, that word aggregate corresponds to the word skanda, which means heaps or lumps. And they're the 5, it's a really interesting term, the 5 like lumps that make up human experience. So, and that's the way like a human being is described, as having these different functioning parts of ourselves. And of course, in the Heart Sutra, it's famous for saying that all of those, they're empty, which the more technical term is they're empty of independently existing nature. So they are subject to emptiness. They are subject to such overflowing fullness and interrelationship that we can't find essentially what they are. So without going into the content so much, I'll suggest a couple of ways to work with that. One approach is to find words that work for you and learn how to do a little mental jump when that block comes. And be like, he's saying thinking there. Okay, I'm going to jump back to formations or consciousness, whatever it is. And then you can use that to find your way into the truth of what Kyogen Carlson might be saying. And at other times, I would recommend that first, and then other times I would hang out with the block. Hang out with the block and let it be opaque for a bit and see if it can't show you something else. It sounds like you've been doing that a little bit, to hang out with the block, but it's not going anywhere. So I wouldn't get too caught on it and instead just kind of move forward with it as it's appearing.
I took this class, I think the last time that it was given, and I think that's the same speed bump. And I should probably ask about this, and then swept it under the rug. And then this time, I hit it again, I'm like, oh, I should probably ask about this.
Yeah. And this is a really good point that sometimes those speed bumps, it can be really good practice not to get too hung up on them. That lots of these concepts and teachings, hung up's not the right word, let your heart's inspiration be derailed because you want to get it. That there are going to be things you hit one time and you're just going to come out the other end and be like, what? And if you can, I often, especially early on, just recommend keep going. So if something didn't land, I actually have difficulty in that part in Kyogen Carlson's book too. Lots of his examples and the amount of time he gives to that section doesn't really light my fire. So usually I'll kind of make it through and then kind of say, okay, some things landed, a lot of things didn't, and to keep going. But if I try and bear down with language that's challenging for me, oftentimes I lose the whole wheel and thread of my inquiry, and that I find isn't worth it in the end. But rather sort of live to fight another day kind of feeling. Thank you for bringing that up. Is anyone else spending time with Zen Roots? Are people reading that? Just hands. I'd be really curious. There's no... Just see if it's worth it. Yeah. Good. Did anyone look into the Buddhist Cosmos book that I sent the link to? It's quite the 90s webpage, if anyone goes to it.
I read the table of contents, and that was a little intimidating.
It's really intense, yeah. Okay, well, we don't need to linger there. And I think hopefully if we can make it through all this material, we should have some questions loosed up from the earth. Okay. Yeah, Matt?
Just gonna say, the other thing that you sent from the first week, the talks, I've really enjoyed going through. It's been helpful in the like self and not self teachings, where from what I gathered in this one, it's that like looking at self as an activity or a process, like that my formation of self is a strategy to acquire happiness, or I don't know, I've never looked at it in those terms before, and the question not so much of being like where I get hung up of like if I'm not a self, self or not self, but it's like when is it skillful in terms of long-term happiness and welfare to think of myself in terms of self, and when is it skillful to not think in terms of self? All that's been pretty illuminating.
Yeah, so that's the selves and not selves, I think. Selves and not self, something like that, I believe by, is it Tanisaru Bhikkhu? Does that sound correct? He does it's a really good introduction, because like you said, we're so used to, I think, thinking of our self as a noun, but to start and like, I'm this static thing that sort of just, I don't know, things of the world sort of ping off me, and then I have like decisions, and then I sort of express myself, and there's some amount of decision or not decision in there, versus I'm always actively selfing. That is what human beings do, and the teaching of no self is giving us boundless agency within that, and also showing us the limit to our agency, which is very challenging, especially when you sit down for meditation, and if you're walking around thinking you have a good amount of control over what you call yourself, then all of a sudden you face the wall, and it's endless mind throw up might be coming up in front of you, and it's a little bit embarrassing, right? But to see that, it gives us quite a bit of fire to approach selfing with more humility, more nuance, something that we don't have otherwise. You want to say anything else?
Just that it kind of falls in line with non-Buddhist examples in life, and just like how contextually different parts of me will come forward, whether it's in a professional setting or with one friend or with a different friend or a group of friends, and that all kind of nests from what the bhikkhu was saying in the talks.
Totally. And it also shoots at that, I think, kind of a childish idea of, I don't know if this is exactly right or exactly what I mean, but an American idea of authenticity, right? That I carry some golden truth that in whatever context I'm in, I just always share that golden self-truth that I have. But versus it's kind of ridiculous and silly that we have compartments not the right word, but fields of expression in our life that relate just like you're saying. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, well maybe we'll start with a quick review and then go into some new material. So, over the last 2 classes, of course we started with anicca and anatta, no self and impermanence. So these teachings basically that externally and internally, there's nothing that can be pinned down. Everything's moving all the time. The great analysis for this is fire. The whole, Koun Ejo, one of the ancestors of our school, said the whole earth, a single mass of fire, right? Kind of exciting imagery right there. And that is fairly terrifying for living beings. You think you have something that can stay put, something that's yours, a stable self, a noun, and that just isn't the case. And when we misunderstand that's the quality of the world, then dukkha is present, an anxiousness, an attempt to set the world in like and dislike. Classic image for that is we try and tilt the world so that things we like roll toward us, or tilt the world away and things that we don't like roll away from us. You can see how exhausting it is. We're just kind of like, whoa, there are all these balls like moving around and it's one flat plane, right? So, anywho, you get the image. That's the exhaustion, the endless anxiety of dukkha that we tend to live with without questioning it very much. And the most important maybe image of dukkha in the Buddhist tradition is the 6 wheels, the 6 realms, or the wheel of life, the bhavakakra, or the womb of becoming, the womb of life and death, that wheel. I'm looking at people who are new to the class. So if you haven't seen it, it's a circle with all these different pictures of different mythical beings, mythical and non-mythical, and these are strategies that living beings give rise to in order to deal with their dukkha. And so to think of that as ways of dukkhaing, the heavenly beings, the angry gods, hell realms, hungry ghosts. So these are unskillful ways to conquer, avoid, manage no self and impermanence. The dukkha that the Buddha woke up to, he gave an analysis of through the 4 Noble Truths. That there is this suffering or dukkha as the first one, and it has a cause, and it's thirst, craving, and grasping. And there's such a thing as nibbana or nirvana, which is cessation. So it literally translates to a flame going out. And that's not the flames of impermanence in that first analogy of the whole earth as a single mass of fire, but the flames of suffering, the flames of dukkha can be extinguished. And that has a cause. And that cause is path. And that 4 Noble Truths, those 4 Noble Truths, they correspond to how diseases were dealt with in that time in India. It's how a physician would prescribe a medicine or a cure. So it's symptom, cause, cure, cause. Can you see that? Symptom, and what's the cause of the symptom? What's the cure, and what's the cause of the cure? So it's quite logical in that sense. And that cause is path. So I want to look further at this path today. Oh man, I forgot. There's such a great image right there. You can take a mental snapshot of that. And suffering, craving, these are reciprocal. They live with each other. Cessation and path live with each other. This path that the Buddha taught, the Eightfold Path. And Joichi, could you start handing out the handout for tonight? And Brian, would you do me a favor? Could you come up here and flip this for me?
Sure.
So I don't have to mess with my robes for the next 7 minutes.
Totally.
Just turn it cleanly around. It's totally ready. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, we weren't quite ready for that, but that's okay. So sorry about this PDF. It's getting a little schlocky. It's been photocopied a number of times. And in fact, if people have a pencil in front of them, or a pen, like to make an edit, before I explain anything further, that prajna on the right, under the Eightfold Path, there should be a bracket just around right view. A bracket that's just around right view, and then right intention, right speech, right action, and right livelihood. That should all be sila. So we'll go into what all that means in a second.
What was the edit?
That at the top right, under there's right view, there should be a bracket. What it looks like. People following that? Is that the only question? Okay. Yeah. So, explaining this a little further, the Buddha first taught the Eightfold Path. And at some point, over the 2,500 years of Buddhism moving throughout East Asia, a new formation of talking about the path arose. And these are the 6 perfections, which we more commonly use in the Zen school, and are used quite often here at this temple in particular. So this term, 6 perfections, that's paramita. So people will have some familiarity with that word if you're coming here on Sundays or doing chanting services. At the very end of chanting a sutra, and there might be a dedication. And if we do it in Japanese, it'll end with prajna paramita. So there we are, that prajna or wisdom, paramita, the perfection of wisdom, which so much of Zen practice is curious about that wisdom. And so we can see that these are interrelated. They have lots of connection. And I don't even want to explain this to you. It's a fairly clear diagram, right? That these all cross over into different areas. So that paramita, it also translates to crossing over. So to reach the other shore is another way it's talked about. And I think in the Sanskrit, there's a way that that word paramita can be parsed out to give different interpretations. And so one of them comes over as a crossing over, and the other is a kind of like perfect state. So I think the more poetic and inviting term for many people feels like a crossing over. So how is it that these qualities and activities help us move beyond, go through, go to the other side of something? And that something is usually dukkha. We're going beyond, we're going past a life lived by anxiousness. So I don't think you can read this little section at the bottom later if you'd like. Master Sosan, a Korean Zen teacher, master in the 1600s, gives poetic description about what's going on here. But I like to explain it with this diagram that I've put up here, the kind of relationship between these 6 perfections with each other. One way we can think of these is that the 6 perfections right there are ordered. They're ordered in the way they usually come. In generosity is first, and then discipline or ethics, morality, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. So 1 through 6. And we can look at them one way is that they are talking about the stepping of the path, and that generosity is a really good place to start. So the Buddha, when teaching people, would say, if you were a lay householder, a very good thing to do is give money to the Sangha. Give support, give your time, build huts, sew robes, give cloth, give food, support the Sangha. And then moving into these other layers. And they also have relationships between them. That generosity and ethics hold a particular, they're grouped together in a certain way. Same with patience and energy, and lastly, wisdom and meditation. And they also relate to depth of understanding. So these are called the 6 perfections. And the real kicker in the whole game is wisdom. So we can think of, I'll just draw a very simplistic narrative of spiritual path. You're stuck in thinking what's yours is yours, and it's your job to protect it, to have a good life. Basic living being situation. What is the first prescription for your state? Give some stuff away. Extend yourself a little bit. See that very static, simplistic view of life doesn't work, and it actually creates so much more suffering from you. So the very first prescription is give some of that stuff away, whether it's your comfort, extending yourself in terms of kindness and presence with people, or your physical materials. And next, see that everything you do relates to other beings. There's no such thing as just an independent life. No matter what, even our coarsest actions, we're always pressed up against the world. So that brings ethical living right into the center of how we live. If you start to move in these ways and start to bring ethical living in mind, you're going to encounter your own karma, your own selfishness, and the basic challenge of dealing with living beings. And that requires patience. And you have to see that you will have to put up with things you don't like, and you'll have to learn how to wade your way through that terrain. And in order to keep going with that, you have to become more balanced and nuanced in your energy. If you simply burn hot when you have things that you like, when you have like a good mind state that you like, and turn off when you're feeling a little bit lethargic or there are things you don't like, then you're not going to be able to sustain practice, sustain these qualities that will transform your life. Once you start moving with a little bit of patience and a little bit of energy and things are becoming balanced, the place where you can really turn up the heat is through meditation practice, through becoming more concentrated. And it enhances your ability to find the infinite number of little marks on the dial, right? So we encounter all the little subtle turnings of our minds that mostly we're quite unaware of when we're moving through the world. And when we sit down and we face the wall and straighten our back and bring some energy, that we become present to a whole kind of world that is otherwise difficult to perceive. And when we're doing that, that very deepening, that very sensitizing helps us further the investigation of no self and impermanence. That at that point when we're sitting in meditation practice, our degree of nuance, our degree of fully feeling into the total ungraspability of all phenomena opens naturally of itself. And this is the place where wisdom is extended. And then the fun part, it goes right back to the top. That now how do we give in a way that is more in accord with our nuanced perspective and our more full engagement with our materials, whether those are our physical assets, our material assets, or our mental energies. So this diagram is meant to display that idea. So a kind of more gross level up here, moving into layers of subtlety, and finally this kind of more hot burning zone that moves living beings directly into perception of emptiness. However, it's not that simplistic. Each one of these are perfections. So we can say that within generosity itself, within just the giving of anything, with one extension of your physical materials, kindness, that actually the depth of wisdom is totally present. I think this is the faith, particular faith in the Zen school, the Mahayana, the great vehicle, in saying that, but although you will not perceive it, you will not be able to know that as a living being, although a Buddha will be able to see that in you. Can we get that feeling? That even the smallest kindness contains the depth of wisdom in it. That's, if anyone came to my talk on Sunday about the Lotus Sutra, this is an idea that the Lotus Sutra is playing with throughout the entire thing. That even if your idea for being good actually totally misses the mark, even the simple, like, close enough movement will be your cause for eventually attaining full, perfect Buddhahood. So this deep faith in all movements of goodness, but also saying that we can't just hang out in our coarse movements of goodness and sort of eat bonbons and drink coffee all day. That there has to be the fuller investigation, and if we are doing the practice, doing the work of waking up, that'll happen of its own accord, and that subtlety will grow and move in us. Last thing I'll say about this paper right here, or maybe not last thing, I'll say one more thing, that sila, samadhi, and prajna. So these are oftentimes referred to as the threefold trainings. And one way we can image them is if we ever try and look directly at one of them, we can know that behind them are always the other two. That makes sense? If I try and look directly at ethics, ethical behavior, the truth of whatever ethical living is totally contained in concentration and wisdom. If I just want to look at prajna, wisdom, the depth of interpenetration of all phenomena, what I will see behind that is concentration and awareness and ethical living, right? And this becomes a really important safeguard, I think, in our own hearts as we endeavor in spiritual practice. I think the number of communities that have gone off track because someone appears quite shiny in wisdom, for example, right? And sort of quietly and not so quietly, subtly, not so subtly, pretty unethical things start to happen in that community. Someone gets a little drunk on that power and starts moving unethically. So I think that idea of these three being totally married with each other is really important for our own walking of the path. Any questions about that? Yeah, Bill?
This may be a little bit tangential, but I believe I've heard Genjo refer to Prajnaparamita as like the figure up here too, which is also like a feminine personified image. And I'm just kind of curious about that piece of it, of what are these words in relation to the metaphor, in relation to the personification of a specifically female body?
Yeah.
Like holding this, or a visual representation of wisdom and like knowing in this form. If you could expand on that.
Yeah, could you say that last, where wisdom and knowing form through the image?
Wisdom and knowing kind of personified in this form, I guess.
Yeah. So one of her epithets is Mother of the Buddhas, and the womb of the Buddhas. And there's also something in there about womb and seed, womb and embryo in Prajnaparamita, and something in the language. So it's unclear which is always it's being referred to when you talk about Prajnaparamita, whether it's the womb or the embryo. And one way we can think about this is we're often talking about impermanence and no self with an edge, with the dukkha edge. You feel that? It's always on the side of this is the hard thing living beings have to contend with, but they heroically face it, or sort of realize they don't have a choice but to face it, and then they transform into Buddhas. Another way we can think about it, it is the very gateway of Buddhahood that Buddhas present and speak eloquently of for living beings, and that she, taking on her personified form, is always graciously extending gateways of walking through. So we can after class I'll point you to, there's a very beautiful sutra that we chant here in the mornings on Tuesday and Thursday called the Hymn to the Perfection of Wisdom. And one of, I think, the most beautiful lines in there is, she is an ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light. And from every conscious being on every plane, she removes the faintest trace of darkness. So I think one way I like to image that is particularly when sitting meditation, and I can just subtly loose my judging mind and cultivate some appreciation for phenomena. And my judgment loses its hold, and there's somehow this kind of miraculous show going on. And I can feel washed by that in a way that is quite hard to explain or really to hold on to. But that maybe this is the quality of reality, and not just the pain and difficulty of impermanence, but just depending from where you're standing, it'll appear as one or the other. So we could say, a dukkhic existence, a dukkha existence living through suffering, that fire will be pain, and for a Buddha living in nirvana, that impermanence and fire will be that ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light, and will be a joyous, pleasant, beautiful experience. And I think her hands, there's something like this, right? Can you tell me? Oh yeah. Yeah. If I remember correctly, it's something about the turning of the wheel mantra. Like her body being exemplified in this hand posture as the ever-turning gate that we are washed in and have the opportunity to be born as Buddhas through. Yeah. Does that get at your question? Play with it? Yeah.
I was
Indigo.
wondering, you were describing sort of these two opposites, like either this Buddha experience or this dukkha experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that it's sort of functionally helpful to imagine those extremes, but could you maybe speak on I feel like when I think in those extremes, it gets in my way, and I can't find those subtle dial markers in between.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had anything to say about that, because I feel like that's a sticking point for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's why we practice meditation. I think for me at least, I feel like when I think about the concept, it settles me in a certain way, but it's definitely on a higher wavelength than it's a little fast, it's a little shallow, and it prepares me to do something that you're talking about, which is totally release that narrative and encounter phenomena without any kind of concept holding me. Like when you sit down for meditation and you might think, now I'm gonna get calm, right? Or, my experience will be like this, I'm trying to use it like this. So I see you there, and one thing I come back to again and again is that the Buddha talked a lot. There's some Zen schools which are like, words have no meaning, give up all concepts. And so to learn to hold the concepts really lightly, like you're saying, and recognize where it's like, that's kind of a block, and use them for their usefulness and be very prepared to drop them, and then go into a place that actually gives them some color, cook them in some spices a bit while you sit, and then bring them out and hold them again. See if their weight's changed. See if they smell a little bit different.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Anyone else? Those questions are really great. Yeah. Did anyone else feel kind of blocked in hearing them in those extremes? Joichi said yes. Anyone online, you got anything? If you remember, you all can speak and be seen. Okay, we'll go on. We'll talk about karma next. So karma, probably one of the most slippery terms in Buddhism, especially because it's really moved into our culture in not a great way. So right, someone gets hit by a bus, it's like, well, they were a jerk. That was their karma, right? Really, it translates to mean cause and effect, or simply action. Karma, the Pali is kamma. And this is a concept that's present all over East Asia and in the Hindu religious ecosystem. And at its most intense point, that was the backbone of caste. So right, you were born as a peasant or in the priest class, and it was your karma. And your role in society was utterly unquestionable, zero mobility in that lifetime for what you would do with your life, which is something that the Buddha really worked against in his life, that especially being a monk it had an important status, a high status. I don't think I can image it very well. It probably depended on what kingdom you were in, or how friendly a particular village was to monks or not in the Buddha's order. However, quite an elevation in status from, say, being an untouchable or the lowest caste. And that caused a lot of, that ruffled society a lot. There's a very low bar to being in the Buddha Sangha. Well, in one sense, really high bar. You had to give up everything. On the other hand, you really just had to have a body. So pretty low bar in that sense. I love the stories. I think I've mentioned this before, that a goat herd or a cow herd just saw the Buddha and the Sangha walking by, and he's like, "Can I come with you?" And they were like, "Yeah." And so he gave his stick to his friend and said, "Bye, see you later. I'm gonna go with you." So all that to say, really important thing in the Buddha's time and in East Asia in general. And this word karma, it's not the same even within contemporary schools of Buddhism. So there's lots of different ideas of karma. And I would say, rather than feeling like if you have some idea that you will get the idea of karma, I would say maybe feel for where you can have a sense of the flow of karma, like what's happening. So for me, that a statement there comes down to where's the fulcrum of agency in a living being? Where's that fulcrum? And Buddhism identifies a number of realms of cause and effect, which affect a living being's life. And some of those are hereditary situation. So there's a cause and effect that we see moving through time. Physical laws, obviously, Newtonian physics, other biological laws, and species changing over time. But this karma, the karma that's really cared about in Buddhism, is volition. So the fulcrum of agency is our sense of choice. I think it's difficult to say whether that choice really exists or not. That's not the question. But I think our sense of agency as a living being is tremendously important. And really, it's the root of everything we've been talking about, right? That on one sense, we're talking about the idea that there's no self. There's nothing that's static inside, and nothing stays put outside. Everything is falling apart. And yet, your choice really matters, right? Those seem a little bit at odds. We'll see if that gets clarified in a minute when we talk more about nirvana, but we'll stay with this right now, that volition is incredibly important to the experience of a living being. So the place of that volition in a human being is thought, speech, and action. For everyone who's come here on a Sunday, we always chant the repentance verse. All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind. And quick backtrack. Greed, hate, and delusion, hub of the wheel of samsara, pig, cock, and what's the other one? Snake, thank you. Greed, hate, and delusion. Through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. I fully avow. That word avow, I thought it always meant disavow for a long time. I fully disavow, like I cut it off. It means something more like to make known, to face, to air out. I fully avow. All my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. So this is the karma we're talking about. And there are 4 types. The first is bad karma. And I think really the literal translation that the Buddha used was dark. So we also saw in the Wheel of Life, right in that second ring of the wheel, the dark side of that. We're being led down into the unfavorable rebirths, the animal realms, the hell realm, and the hungry ghosts. So really not hard to imagine. Stinginess, meanness, dominance of self-view, clinging to not being a reciprocal being. The second kind is good karma. So really these are all of the perfections. The generosity, ethical living, patience or forbearance, energy, meditation. Pretty simple stuff here. Do the good things and avoid the bad things. And the third kind is mixed. So actually, very few of the things that living beings do are either just completely good or completely bad. So that most of everything we're doing all the time has a mix of both. There's a skillfulness and there's an unskillfulness to it. Lastly, the fourth kind is karma that ends karma. The karma that ends karma. And this is volition centered on no self and impermanence. It's one way we can image it. And another way we can think about this good karma, bad karma, and mixed karma is in their relationship with impermanence and no self. So for example, we could see that the root of unskillful karma, this dark karma, is a strong adherence to being an independent self. That's the root of meanness and stinginess and self-grasping. Is I am not an interdependent being. My welfare has nothing to do with yours. I'm going to get what I can get. Okay? Rough caricature there. Good karma is I relate with you. In fact, you are a separate being, and I am a separate being, but we're totally related. Here's an apple. I wanted to eat that apple, but you can't eat that apple. And I will see that I have some gain from that. And now going to mixed karma, let's say here we are that I've given you the apple, and I see there that we are separate beings. And in fact, I might even be trying to get those feelings of, I feel good after I give something away. So there's a self-grasping that can happen in so many of our good actions. And this, let's say, karma that ends karma, very difficult to image that. But something much more like in a situation where, oh, you need that, and I have plenty, and I'm fine. And it just naturally that the apple comes over to you. And I have no perception that I even gave you anything. I have no perception that it was like the left hand helping out the right. How could I draw a distinction between your suffering and mine? And it was so natural that I just had an apple in my hand. Remember, Ejo has a story. He walked a pilgrimage in Japan. There's a whole island of Japan that has 80 Shingon temples on it. And it's very common for priests of many schools of Buddhism to go walk those 80 temples as a pilgrimage and to collect little stamps and to be pilgrims, basically. And many people from the island support the pilgrims in doing that. And you have a little bell that you ring as you walk, and people will hear that and know you're asking for alms. You're open to receiving alms. And Ejo said he saw a woman who was picking potatoes, and she heard the bell, and she just stood up and looked around, and the potatoes that were in her hand, she came over and just gave to him. Right? So often, it's so beautiful. So often I think we're like, well, how many potatoes do I have? How much longer time off? How much do I need to do? But just the potatoes in your hand, come over. So we can see how these ideas of sort of grading intention, not grading like grades, they're gradations of our intention and the kind of quality of the purity of our actions, you could say, really relate directly here. That there can be a kind of giving and ethical living 100% in line with the perception of non-differentiation. And you can also, for example, have an image of doing the right thing. You can look like you're doing the right thing, but actually you are wielding no wisdom. You have no perception of that. And how often is that the game we are playing as living beings, right? Someone told me, be good, like give the brownie away. I'm just doing the right thing. But actually we're still wrestling with and stuck in and have so much suffering and anxiousness over a perception of mine, a perception of yours, right? And so there's also another tremendous pitfall in here in thinking that the perception of wisdom and living by this no self and impermanence just means absence of boundaries. So we can think that I just always have to be giving away my potatoes when someone asks for it. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is a useful question or not, but I wonder a lot about doing, if good is being done, but it's being done for an image purpose, like someone wants to, and there's no wisdom involved. Is there still a net gain of good?
It's a really good question. I think it depends.
Yeah.
It can only be answered in the situation.
Sure.
And I bet it also really depends, it depends on your karma. So for example, if you have a slight addiction to the image,
Sure.
and you're able to feed yourself that lie, versus you're just kind of caught in stinginess, and you want to impress someone, and it helps you leap beyond something. And so I think in one situation, there'll be a net gain. In another situation, it could be the exact same action. This is why it's so subtle and I think beautiful and particular to each moment's arising to know what is the right thing to do. Like, when do you extend yourself in patience versus know where it's skillful to draw a boundary? What's your relationship with someone? What good will be done if you draw the boundary right there? Is it a matter of really protecting yourself in an important way, or is it a matter of an opportunity where you can knock off a sharp edge of yours, right? And actually, I think the answer to that conundrum is be prepared to make mistakes and learn and figure out and have people you trust who can teach you about what are the mistakes you should not make. So have community and be constantly aware and alert of that, and make that a real central part of your walking, to be asking those questions. Yeah, Molly.
This is a really tantalizing, juicy part of this discussion, because this is one of the questions that I've thought about personally as what is karma, what is kindness, what is good? Because so much of what we do has ulterior motives, but it's, I'm kind of losing myself because I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is kind of like actualizing like what I have been thinking. And it's, maybe I have to come back to this, but,
I could play in there if you want.
yeah.
Yeah, happy. This is so, it's such a lively, and I'm happy we got here. This is, for me too, it's really juicy. And I think actually if you're living the path, I know, this is the path I feel like I'm living so often, is feeling into all the tendrils of every action I do, and how does it relate to my intention, and how does it relate to self-serving, and really trying to be helpful deeply to the world. So in the precepts of our tradition, the ethical code that many people here have taken, if someone has a Buddhist name that they've received here, that means they've taken the precepts. And the precepts there are 16 of them. And the first 3 are called the 3, well, first you take refuge. I take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The next set of 3 are called the 3 pure precepts. And the first one is, which was the first one? I vow to refrain from doing evil. The second one is, I will maintain codes and forms, which basically means I will do the good precepts. Like, I will do what I'm going to say I'm going to do, which are the following the ethical codes. So that pans out to, don't do bad, or I'm not going to do bad, I'm going to do good. And the third one is, I vow to embrace living beings. It's really the kicker. And I think where it settles you down into, it's relatively easy to say, okay, I'm going to, well, not that easy actually, but you can get a handle on saying, I'm not going to do the bad things. You can even get a handle on saying, I'm going to do the good things. But what happens next when you realize you're full of both, and that other people are full of both? And I think it, in effect, becomes this place of wisdom and concentration and patience and energy, that we start to have to become more nuanced, and that nuanced has to do with wisdom in clearly perceiving motives, and what I think people miss often is you have to become more compassionate. So I find regularly in my life, if I smell the self-serving kindness, I say, oh, that was nice, wasn't it? You know, you can recognize, you're like, I'm not fantastic, but I'm reasonable. That's a line I'm really enjoying lately, especially because I think there's a kind of guilt that we have, particularly stemming from American Protestant strains that I can't explain too much here, but a kind of emphasis on purity and righteousness that becomes a cruel sword, particularly to ourselves, but not limited to ourselves. And that judging voice that is sniffing out hypocrisy so much. And so we have to become compassionate and just learn to watch, say for example, your own clinging to a self-image of being good and how much it binds you. And if we stop judging it, then we can just watch the karma play out. And you can feel your own sadness with that. You can feel where that good feeling, that karma will run out. And for me, I find that it fuels my own addiction to being overly kind. That it's a way I keep myself grounded by always extending myself. I wonder if people have some, does anyone else feel that sometimes? Like, oh, I'll just keep doing the nice thing, and people perceive me as good and I see myself as good. And then eventually you get run ragged and you've lost your center right there. So this place where you embrace living beings means holding without judgment and just perceiving. This is where this concentration and wisdom comes. So when we take up the posture of meditation, we're really playing in this realm of working on a non-judgmental. The doing, not doing is a technical phrase in there. Intending, non-intending is a way to talk about awareness. I'll say it again. Intending, non-intending is a way to talk about awareness. Right? And it's meant not to be easy to understand. Yeah. You want to say more in there? We can.
No.
Does anyone else want to jump in there or give an example? Or I think this is such a beautiful place to marinate right now, and is so, I think, a central part of the joyful goop of Buddhist practice that it can be hard to get to in groups and discussion and sharing. So, yeah, Bill.
I kind of agree with that words are bullshit a little bit here. At least in that tradition of just like, yeah, like everything about what we're saying implies a perspective, like what is good, what is bad. Establishing harm that can be done, even from like good actions, ultimately implies these like perspectives that you can't really ever have fully, or like bring into your own perception. So even like the karma that ends karma, who determines that it does? Or what? Is that perceived? Or is it just is?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, yeah, what are words doing right now?
See, I guess I would completely argue with you because everything you just said, I think, leads us into a profound investigation. And that these words, I think, are helping us make a bridge across our simplistic thinking. And they bring us into an essential conundrum that they show us the limits of words. And we're always, I think, using language to simplify our existence. So I think the conundrum-y side of this, the conundrum that we're feeling and the kind of uselessness we're feeling is also the bright, really important part of words. And that's where I think precision and learning about these kinds of teachings, like you can hear, let's say if we echo, well, spiritual path is just about becoming whole. If you just walk around and try and really unfold juicy path with that as your narrative, you're going to encounter, I think, a lot of difficulties. But if you have some of these teachings under your belt, I think your invitation into the subtleties of the mystery are greatly enhanced. So, yeah. Do you want to rebuttal or say anything? I don't know. I came out kind of strong there.
A rebuttal would prove your point.
Nobly die by your sword. Thank you for your teaching. Yeah, anyone else?
Thinking about merit is so central, generation and donation of merit is so central in at least our lineages, and I'm curious how it wires into the six perfections. Is it plugged in everywhere? Because it seems like it's mostly generosity, but I can see how it might be others.
Ooh, could you say that one more time? I'm embarrassed to say I was chasing a thought and I missed exactly what you were saying.
The whole thing or just part of it?
Maybe the whole thing if you can do it.
So, because merit is so central to our lineage, or it seems like it's our lineage, I'm guessing it's a more Mahayana thing than anything else. I'm wondering exactly how it plugs into this model, which into the six perfections, because it seems primarily a generosity concept, but is it wired into the others in some fundamental?
Yeah, definitely. Especially in these four. Did people get mostly the gist of that question?
Yeah.
So these four in particular, I would say, are concerned with merit that you can see. And these two are concerned with merit that cannot be perceived. And so this is the practice of here at the temple, you will almost never chant something or do any kind of activity without dedicating the merit to some other being. And so this is a place where we make the connection with this wisdom and concentration, that our school is very fiercely insistent that real merit is only really merit if you give it away. People seeing that? That if this merit that takes you beyond your narrow self-cultivation, like I will get the good stuff, as soon as you have something like that, as a spiritual kind of umph, that you should offer it to all living beings, that you give it away. And that's the way in which it truly stays with you. So there's kind of that paradox here. Anything that you feel like you can hold on to and keep will turn to ashes. Anything that as soon as you hold it and you offer it forward, it maintains this kind of purity that, gosh, I'm totally losing how to describe it. It's really at the edge of words right there. Now, offering the merit to all beings is the way you actually keep it, basically.
What have you learned about when you have that moment of like, oh, I found something and now the thing to do is to give it forward, about skillfully offering it? Because I personally have both experienced and like have caught myself doing this thing where I'm like, I have merit, would you like some? And that's, and it's not, maybe no one was asking, or maybe I'm not, I mean, maybe it's just so I can be like, hey, look what I found. And so, and it makes me doubt that I can share it. And then I don't, because I'm worried about my motives and how to detect or do it well.
Wonder, something I'm feeling from your question that's so important is Sangha being central to a playground of bodhisattvahood, where there's there can be communities where there's such a generosity for your failures, and where there's a teaching I really love of the early. The Buddha taught how to sew a robe, and you find discarded cloth, and you tear off what can't be used, and you hold on to what can be used. And then you take that, and you keep going. Once you have enough cloth, you sew a robe. And I think in a sangha that's functioning well, when a being puts their good foot forward, that always, if you're lucky enough to have seniors around you, people who have been practicing longer and have cultivated eyes of wisdom, that they can just scoop what is beautiful about being offered and just show their appreciation for that, and just quietly, softly touch the other part, but not make a fuss of it, And I think that's a movement that we can also learn to do in ourselves. And I think the process of learning to do that is so enhanced and beautified by a community that is putting these teachings in the center. And really, ideally, at the very top is a teacher who's incredibly skilled in that and is always supporting those heart movements forward and able to help guide where is the skillful part. Yeah, because how horrible is it? It's like I imagine a kiddo being like in the kitchen with their parents, being like, I want to help with dishes. And like, Jimmy, you suck at the dishes. Get out. It's like, okay, here, do this. Sweep the floor in that corner over there, like sort of out of the way. But thank you so much, right? And I think that same process can happen in our own heart, and we have to be so gentle with ourselves. And I think equally true, we have to be willing to discern where we were wrong. It's both. But if we're lacking, if we're too strong in one, we really need to up the other, right? If we're always just like, I'm always trying, right? It's missing something. If I'm always wrong, we're missing something. So we have to have the courage to step each time. Yeah. And I'd say if you're in a community where you don't feel that, it's a good time to bug out. Yeah. Well, I had more content I wanted to get to, but this was a much better situation, I think, for the class. Anyone have any parting thoughts? We're just 2 minutes till time. Yeah, Dawn.
I was just going to add that what comes up for me when I think about karma and I'm going to use the word fact, but I don't know if there's a better word, that we don't necessarily know what the consequence of our actions is going to be. I mean, we may think we're doing the right thing, turns out we weren't actually. The word that comes up for me is humbleness. There just has to be this humbleness and willingness to just keep trying. And I find that inspiring, but also incredibly challenging. I really appreciated the teaching tonight because I think you did a really good job of discussing an incredibly challenging topic. So thank you.
And Dawn, maybe I want to say something. It's been churning around in my week. Dawn and I had a practice discussion together, and a point that Dawn brought up in the idea of karma is that our karma is not equal as living beings. And for me, that was really challenging. I remember, so I've been a student under Genjo for many years, and he said the words, he said, not every being in this lifetime will be able to hold the lineage of our school. That was really scary to me. Like, there are certain challenges we've all faced, and there are certain tremendous difficulties that don't befall living beings equally. And it's not that we are all this kind of like neutral thing, like chugging up the situation of becoming a Buddha. On one sense, it's definitely that. But I think we all have some understanding here of sociology and economics and your opportunities in life and what color your skin is and what country you're born in has tremendous effects on all sorts of aspects of your being. I don't want to just single out that one, but that's one it's really easy to look at and know the effects of. So I find that very humbling and opening as well, and it keeps, for me, that's something that keeps humility at the forefront, is when I don't lose sight of that. Boo.